Uh, Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the British Empire Study Group webinar tonight. Let me just introduce the study group to you all. My name is Bob Gray, and I co-chair the British Empire group with Joan Harmer. We are a group of men and women who have an interest in British Empire-related philately. We particularly enjoy the social and the technical aspects of learning, and we meet in good times at the Collectors Club in Midtown Manhattan, and hopefully soon we'll be back in our clubhouse. And we also meet in webinars like this one. We're very glad you could join us this evening. Let's see. It's not moving, Joan.
Okay, well, just wing it. I think they all know us.
Okay. The first stamp collector and the first stamp dealer were from Britain, and this is a shot of Stanley Gibbons. And you can see here John Gray, no relative. He's the first stamp collector. So the British Empire helped spread philately throughout the British Empire. And if you include the pink spots on this map, which represents the direct empire, if you will, probably 1880s, because they don't have all of South Africa, they don't have Egypt and the Sudan and so forth. But through military and through post offices abroad, you have a very significant contribution of Britain to philately. So what exactly is philately? It's stamp collecting and albums and the like. It's postal history, studies, which is the studies of rates, routes, and markings. It's history, as postal artifacts can be relevant items for historical research. So the next British Empire Study Group meeting will be, again, a webinar, and it's with Arthur Groton, Dr. Arthur Groton, August 5th, and it's on St. Helena, the story of Napoleon's exile. The building to the right there, that's the Collectors Club. So a little housekeeping. We'll have questions will be live, but feel free to use the Q&A or chat. Following the presentation, there'll be some time for social discussions, and you'll be brought into a room where we can all chat. If you would like to disable closed captioning, please just click on your live transcript and hide the subtitles. If you don't see it, click more and you'll see the live transcript selection. If you're interested in a topic, send us an email. We're planning next year's program. So Joan, you want to introduce our speaker today?
Yes, please. It's my honor. Our speaker tonight is Peter McCann, and I think everyone knows, I could say my neighbor, because when I'm down in Florida, we are actually neighbors I live in Bradenton, so we're close. But I'm going to start with the most important award that Peter's won. And that, of course, is the Collectors Club Liechtenstein Award. Then he's done some little things like the role of Distinguished Philatelist, I believe you signed.
Yep.
And was that you? The website's wrong then.
No.
You did.
Sure.
You did. Yeah. You've done everything. I think we probably should just list the awards you haven't won. And I'm going to say this because he won't. The material that you're going to see tonight was shown in Sarasota, first time out, and it won the grant. It was the Grand Award, I think it was.
Well, it was a virtual show, so they didn't give out a grand. They called it the best of show. But so, I did.
Fantastic. That was fantastic. I mean, I hope if I ever exhibit, that would be a great start, but it's not there. So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and I'm not going to take any more of your time, and I'm going to give it over to Peter, and he's going to let me just get up the screen share.
Okay. All right, could, first slide. There we go. Yeah, that's the original title that Joan showed you was basically a long-winded title about the postal history of Dominica and all these sort of things. And it's a very formidable title and a very formal title. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, somebody looks at that and they're going to, afraid that I'm going to show hundreds of slides of rates and routes and markings and all of that. And I'm not going to show you 129 or pages of what's in my exhibit. What I decided to do, could you go back one? Yeah. Back one. Yeah. Next one.
Okay.
Okay. Could you go to the slide? Yeah, that one. So that's the title of the exhibit, and this is a outline and structure of the exhibit. And let me tell you just very briefly a little bit about my philosophy. Postal history exhibits are usually, the primary focus of them is rates, routes, or markings, one of the three, and the progress of the exhibit goes through looking at those aspects over a period of time or in a place. What I decided to do, and I've done with the last couple of my exhibits, and I've focused mostly on British West Indies islands, is look at the postal history of the post office. In other words, the post office and the postal system. And what that does is it doesn't tie me just to postal rates or postal markings or postal routes. It gives me a structure and a framework to look at how the postal system of a particular post office in a particular place developed. And what does that mean? That means that I can do in my exhibit, I can talk about issues of stamps, I can talk about issues of postal stationery, I can do a lot of things that you really have to sort of skirt away from in a formal, very formal, almost FIP level postal history exhibit. So I've taken this and devised an exhibit that shows a lot of things about how the island of Dominica set up the mail system and how it went from an initial primitive mail system on ship letters all the way through to setting up a post office and setting up their own stamps and having village post offices and airmail and censorship and a lot of things. And I do it in a 200-year span, and in an exhibit status is how I designed it as an exhibit. It's 8 frames, and I can do the whole sort of schmear all the way from the 1700s to about World War II, to World War II exactly. I can do the whole thing in 8 frames. So that's all very well and interesting, but for a talk like this, where there's a lot of people that may or not be interested in changes in postal rates over a 30-year period or something, they're more interested in certain things that might be fun to look at, that if you're interested in stamps and mail and letters, that might be interesting to anybody that has this basic interest in stamp collecting and philately. So very briefly, there's the 8 sections of the formal exhibit. And what I've done is taken about 20, 25 items, covers mostly, some cards from the exhibit, and I'm going to show them to you briefly, tell you a little bit about them. And I think they're interesting, and some of them are amusing, and it's a basis for a talk that would appeal, I hope, to a fair number of people. So let's go to the very first actual piece of mail. Next slide, number 3. This is actually the very first item in the exhibit. It's a letter mailed on the 12th of July in 1775. You can see the date right at the top of the letter. It looks like it's a 3, but it's actually a 5. And it was sent from Dominica to Scotland, actually, to Fifeshire, and it came in. You can see the Portsmouth arrival mark, the ship letter arrival mark. So it came into Portsmouth and then went through the British mail system and up to Scotland. There was no real post office in Dominica at the time, but there were people sending letters, and they used the fairly complex and sometimes a little bit cumbersome ship letter method that they were not mail ships as such. They were just ships that carried mail. There was a rate structure set up that was by the British Post Office, by the British government, and for its various colonies, they used reciprocal rates. Either way, that was the rate either from or to Great Britain. And so this is the earliest letter that I have in the exhibit. It's, as I said, it's 12th of July, 1775, showing a piece of mail that went from Dominica, written by a person in Dominica, to a correspondent in Scotland. Oh, and that's a pretty early piece of mail. There's others that exist. The second one gets a little more interesting. This is a letter that was sent on the 18th of December, 1792, and it was received in London in not until May of 18th of May, 1793. It was sent to London, and it shows you that the ship mail, it got there when it got there. It might have taken several weeks or several months to get there. What's interesting about this was that this is a period of time that the packet mail system was set up and being used, and that was a formal system set up, that there were specific ships owned by companies that had contracts with the British government that sent mail on a regular basis, on packets, on regular routes between the various places that were served by the packet mail, that people could know when the ship left and when it arrived in England, and could be much more controlled system of letters and much more efficient than the old ship mail system. But you have to understand, this is a period of time when both the ship letter system and the packet mail system was set up. The packet mail system, most of the various places that use packet mail set up identification marks to show, or hand stamps to show the origin of the mail and where it came from and when it went to. So these are really the first postal markings. This is the first postal marking from Dominica. It's a two-line hand stamp, and you can see it's D-O-M-I and then N-I-C-A. So it was a split hand stamp there, and it was, as I said, sent in 1792, and it was arrived in London 1890. This is one of the key items if you want to collect postal history Dominica. There's only 3 examples of this known. This is the oldest and first example, and probably the best. And if you want to have Dominica postal history, if you have one of these, you're golden. It's a very, very nice and very rare item, and I'm very pleased to be able to have it. So that's the first Dominica hand stamped. Next one shows you a little more sophisticated version, also packet mail, sent in 13th of December 1802, and you can actually see right on the thing there with the date, and you can see the rate. I'm not going to go into the rates in all of these, except when they're very interesting. Again, sent to London, and it's just really nice. You look at that and you say, hey, that's a great, if such things appeal to you, a really nice marking showing a really great piece of postal history from Dominica to London, with a great example of the first full Dominica marking showing the date. And the next one is also another packet mail. They got a little more elaborate. This is back in, this was sent in 1807, yeah. Sent in 15th of January, yeah, well, it's right there on it, sorry. 1807, arrived in London in March, January, still took a while by packet ship. And these markings started to get a little more elaborate. The Floron type of marking was used in a number of the different British colonies around the world, again, to show origin of the mail and when it left the country of origin. And in many cases, the back stamp, there's a back stamp on the back of this letter showing that it arrived in London the 27th of March, and it shows the rate, the 2 shilling rate there. But that's a really nice strike, heavy strike. It's probably the best one I've seen. I have several examples of this mark, but that's a really good one. But it's fun to see a really clear, almost oily, the ink was kind of oily and it went into the paper, and it's a great marking. If such things excite you, which I like. Okay, next. Okay, this gets to the point in about 1850, I think it was, that the first really official British post office was set up. The packet mail letters, there's a sort of semi-official mail from these companies that ran the packet ships. But then in 1850, the British, and certainly in Dominica, set up its first post office. And that was at the point that the British mails were starting to encourage prepayment of letters, and all the other things you see would have shown in previous to this time. Mail was paid for by the recipient, and sometimes it was paid and sometimes it wasn't. It was a cumbersome system. So the post office in general shifted over from payment on collection, so to speak, to prepaid mail. And this eventually evolved, as of course you know, into the use of stamps. But this was the pre-stamp period, certainly in Dominica, and they used what's called, which have been defined as the crown circles. And the crown circles was used by many British colonies, and they were basically a crown and a circle with the name of the country or the colony and the paid marking, the paid thing in there. And they were almost always in red to show the red marking was a signal to people on both ends that the letter had been paid for, prepaid. And this is the only example of the Dominica crown circle stamped in black. And this particular item, this is the only one known in black. And this particular item has been the subject of discussion by people who are interested in such minutiae or exotic esoterica. Why the black, and back and forth, and then what, so on and so forth. My personal feeling about it is that this is the simplest sort of Occam razor solution. There was a black ink pad there, and he wanted to show it was prepaid, and he whamped his thing down at, crown circle stamp, whapped it in the black ink pad and stamped it on the letter. So there's no long intellectual discussion on why a black was used instead of the red, and it was it, I don't know. That's what I think. But anyway, that's the famous or infamous black crown circle of Dominica. If you go to the next one. And this is what most crown circles look like for most countries. They're in red, showing it was prepaid. This is prepaid in Dominica. And these crown circles I didn't mention, but the Dominica ones are pretty scarce, pretty rare. And in the early period of use, from about 1845 till about 1848, there's only about 5 or 6 of them known. This is the only one known that actually was a crown circle used on a letter. You can see it's not to London or to Great Britain anywhere. It's to Bermuda. It's an inter-island rate. There was a rate of 4 penny. You can see it marked very clearly on the cover here. So it's very unusual. It's the only letter with a crown circle, Dominica crown circle, that was sent not to the United Kingdom, to Great Britain, but to an inter-island letter to Bermuda. So it's quite an unusual piece, and it's a very nice example of the crown circle. Okay, let's go on. What are we doing for time? I don't want to talk too long on these. Okay, next. What have we got that's unusual? Okay, we get into the stamp period, and you look at this. This is a letter from, what is that? 1859, yeah. 1859, 28th of August it was sent, and it arrived, you can see, in London on the 15th of September. And there's an obliteration or a cancel there that says A07, and that was a obliterator that was given, the number was given to Dominica. So any stamps that you see canceled with A07 were showing that it was canceled by the Dominica post office. And there's also a Dominica hand cancel, a date stamp on the back of this letter. But if you look carefully, or if you can't look so carefully because it's kind of covering up, that's a British stamp. That's not a Dominica stamp. That's a British stamp. For a 2-year period, the British Post Office sent out to many of the colonies as an experiment in stamps, to use stamps, and they sent them British stamps to be used in the country, but being canceled in and used as from outgoing mail from the colony back to wherever. In this case, it was back to England. It went to London, and then it went to Liverpool. So this is a 2-year period in which British stamps were actually used in the colony, and for 2 years. And these are howlingly rare. They're very scarce. And you find a few single stamps you can find them with the A07, but on a letter like this, on a cover like this, they're very rare. And it's kind of grubby looking, but it's a very nice item. If you go to the next one. Okay, this is a gem. This was sent in 1874 in November. 11th of November, 1874. And if you look at it, you can see that it's a Dominica stamp. In May of 1874, Dominica issued its first 3 stamps. There was a 1 penny, a 2.5 penny, and a shilling stamp, all issued on the same day. And they finally, it took them a while from that 1858 period till they only used the British stamps for a while, and then they went back to using whatever to prepay it. But they only got their own stamp issues in May of 1874. This particular item is a really, really nice item, and it's, as I said, it's 1874, November, 11th of November. Now that's a pretty long period of time in terms of months, from May to November. But I was lucky enough to actually get this in an auction not that long ago, maybe a year or 2 ago. And I noticed the date that it was in November, and I said, oh yeah, that's pretty early, because first of all, one fact, Dominica stamps on letters are very rare. There's probably only, for the first 3 stamps that are issued, there's only less than maybe 15 or 20 covers known, period, that exist that have the Dominica stamps on them in that early period for the first issue. And this turns out to be the actual first recorded example of a stamp on cover of that first stamp issue in May, even though it was sent in November. So I was very fortunate to find it, and it's just a great item. And fortunately, other people who might have been bidding on this didn't really make the connection that is this the first recorded cover of the first stamp issue. I went back and checked a lot of old auction catalogs and things, and this is it. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and somebody's going to come up and, oh, I have one in October instead of November. But anyway, for the time being, this is the oldest one. So I was very fortunate to get that. Next one. This is also the first issue, 1883 cover that was sent. What happened was Dominica, the postal rates changed, Universal Postal Union went in, the various postal rates changed, and Dominica all of a sudden needed some halfpenny stamps for various rates and so on and so forth. They had the 2.5 penny here, but they didn't have any actual halfpennies to make up a halfpenny rate for several other things. So they took and made some provisional overprints. They took the 1 penny stamps from the first issue and basically put 2 halfpenny, overprinted them with 2 halfpenny, with half pennies on them in each half of the stamp. You can see there's 2 different halves, the front and the back on this, and use them. This particular item is actually very, very interesting. It's from Dominica to the French island of Martinique, which is not common to have from the British island to the French island, but they exist. What's unusual about this that makes this a really, really valuable and rare cover, it's not the halfpenny provisionals, which look very sexy and very interesting, which they are, of course, but it's the 2.5 penny stamps. That's what I'm talking about. Those original first issue 1874 stamps. There they are on cover, intact and very, very rare. So you can get the halfpenny like that. The provisional stamps, if you bought a cover just somewhere from a dealer or in an auction or something, you could probably get one for, somewhere between £300 and £500, somewhere, or dollars or euros, what have you, in that range. With the Dominica full intact stamps on them, and you can add basically in terms of the value of the cover if somebody wants to buy it a factor of 10. So it's 10 times more valuable if you have the intact stamps on. So that's a very, very rare cover, but not because of the sexy looking halfpenny provisional. It's because of just the 2 ordinary kind of brown looking 2.5 penny stamps there. Okay, next. This pretty boring looking little postcard, in some ways, postal card, excuse me. It's a provisional postcard. There was only 100 of them printed, and they were designed for a very specific, if you can read down about the 5th line down in very small letters, it says there, for countries within 300 miles service, I can't read that, in packet for the service. In other words, these postal cards were to be used to send to places that were within 300 nautical miles of Dominica in this case. And And so they only issued a 300. It's not a, you basically, if you take a, sort of draw a circle around the Dominica and 300 miles in every direction, you get several islands there, but not many other places. If you look at this, you can see in the bottom, it's got our pictures down there a little bit, but it's actually sent to the island of Trinidad. Well, Trinidad is outside of the 300-mile nautical mile range. So to send this to Trinidad, they actually had to add, the person had to add, by the way, I should have first of all explained, these cards were sold with a half penny, with a penny stamp right at the top there attached to it, and then you could mail it. It was a prepaid card. But this was, first of all, outside the 300-mile range. So the sender had to add an extra half penny as a surcharge for beyond the 300-mile limit. And then for whatever reason, he or she decided to send it registered. So they had to add another 2 1-penny stamps to make the total rate up to 1, 2, 3.5 pence to send this postal card. But what makes this really unusual is just finding one of these 300-mile cards actually used. I made a note. There's only 6 examples that have been reported. It's pretty boring. It was interesting. I first started conducting Dominica, and I went through a catalog, and I was just getting good stuff for Dominica, and I came across this card in an auction catalog, and it was a section of registered postcards, which is a pretty specialized postal cards, not postcards, postal cards. And I was going down and I saw one from Dominica, and I saw what the estimate was. And I said, holy God, why the hell is that? It was some incredibly expensive starting price. And I said, what's such a big deal about this? So I went and did some research, and a couple of people helped me with it. And they said, well, it's because it's a provisional postcard and there's only 100 of them printed, and So I went ahead and bid on it and got it, and I'm very pleased I did. And several people, my friend Jamie Goff, who's published a very long 2-volume treatise on postal cards and UPU postal cards, illustrated this card in his book, showing this example. It's a neat thing. Anyway, next. How are we doing on time? I don't want to. Okay, this is just sort of a little bit of an example of eye candy, if you like sexy looking covers. Those are the famous or infamous half-penny provisionals that I told you about. They were clearly designed, these covers were designed by collectors who wanted to have the famous, they were written up in London stamp journals and things, the famous half-penny provisionals from Dominica. I stuck these on the same page in the exhibit to show the thing that you can actually see all 3 of the types of the half-penny provisionals. The first ones they printed were the ones on the bottom. And if you take a look, you can see a little tiny black half-penny in the middle of each of the stamps, okay? So they weren't, you really couldn't read it, and then they were not, there was a lot of complaints about it, that they couldn't see the halfpenny. So then they went to a second design, which is the top section up in the upper cover, the top row. They printed out halfpenny, and still there were complaints because it was black ink. It wasn't really clear that it was halfpenny, and So they finally said, "Oh, to hell with it! We're gonna make sure they know it's a halfpenny." And so the big, huge 1/2 in red right in the middle of the stamp, so you can't mistake which is, what the rate, what the denomination is of the bisected stamp. And these were all done by the post office. So you have 2 covers. One's to St. Kitts, and the other one is to Guadeloupe. And by the way, if you go and I calculated all the rates there, exactly the right rate to send to both places with registered mail. There's no question. It was very carefully. It's not just overdone covers, exactly the right rate. Next. All right. Now, a little bit of history to give you context to this covers. You see Leeward Islands there, not Dominica. What happened in 1890, an enlightened governor of the Leeward Islands, you have to understand all the Leeward Islands, and that included Dominica, St. Kitts Nevis, British Virgin Islands, Antigua, and Montserrat. And I used to exhibit Montserrat, so I have a very fond feeling for Montserrat. They were all the Leeward Islands and run by one governor, and he had a representative in each island, a resident commissioner in each island to do the local administration. So the Leeward Islands rule by the governor of the Leeward Islands was pretty light. But one of the governors decided that this having all these one colony having all these different stamp issues, that's crazy. Let's get rid of that, and we'll put in some Leeward Island stamps. Well, it lasted about 10 years, and I'll give you the rest of the story. But anyway, they issued Leeward Island stamps, and they stopped issuing each island, including Dominica, stopped issuing their own stamps and just used Leeward Island stamps. Well, there was a scream and a howl and letters, and it took 10 years, but they lost an enormous amount of revenue, all of the islands, from the stamp collectors. But who the hell, they could just get Leeward Island stamps, and they lost the St. Kitts stamps, and they lost the Montserrat stamps, and all they got was Leeward Island key plates. So these were used about 10 years, starting in 1890 till, well, 1903, certainly in Dominica. And that's an interesting story in itself, and we'll get to the blend. What eventually happened, to finish the story on that, was in 1890 the Leeward Islands governor and government finally gave in, and all the islands started issuing their own stamps again. But they kept the Leeward Islands key plates for each of the reigns, for Victoria and Edward and George V, George VI, and Queen Elizabeth. That same design with whatever monarch was on there, with that key plate design. Now here is obviously, as I said, a contrived cover that a stamp collector certainly wrote to the postmaster of Dominica and said, ordered some stamps and said, put the whole Leeward Islands issue on the cover and send it back to me, a collector in Ohio. And they did that. And so it's a collector's philatelic cover, and with the whole key plate issue of the Leeward Islands on it. And you say, well, why, hey, McCann, why are you showing this very philatelic cover in what's supposed to be a serious postal history exhibit? And I come back, this is a hypothetical question. Nobody's actually asked me that yet. Well, I've only shown it actually once, but because you can see an example, particularly of the top left hand on the top row, there's a 5-shilling stamp there. You never see a 5-shilling stamp used on cover. You might see it on a parcel remnant or something, a cutout from a parcel, from a heavy parcel, but they weren't used for stamp. They weren't used for postage. If you can read these stamps, they're postage and revenue. These upper values, particularly the shilling and the 5-shilling, were used for revenue documents. Okay, so my logic, and I think it's a perfectly good one, is to show the history of the post office and what happened and what was going on. And here's an example of somebody writing into the post office and wanting the whole set of stamps and wanting them used on a letter so they could show that it was a postage stamp. So it is a philatelic cover, but it's a very rare 5-shilling stamp on cover. They don't exist. I mean, there's 2 or 3 of them known that have been reported. And as soon as I say that, 20 people will write me and say, well, I have one. Well, anyway, to my knowledge, there's only 2 or 3 of them known. So that's my raison d'etre, why I show a whole philatelic cover in my exhibit. And I think it's a beautiful looking cover. Anyway, next. This is a very rare, kind of boring looking piece of brown paper, but it's a parcel post receipt for somebody from Dominica in 1903, sending some samples to either a museum, we can't tell, in London, to either a museum or a university from Dominica. And I would suspect there are some sort of botanical examples, as I said, to either botanical garden or to some museum or something in England. Natural history specimens. It's a Dominica label with a Dominica showing the rate, the 4-penny rate there to send the thing, and for foreign and colonial post printed up for Dominica. And it's just a neat thing, and it's definitely a piece of postal history. There's only 2 of these that have ever been recorded, and I managed to get one of them. So it's just an interesting little side path of another thing that the post office was doing. Next. Here's another example, and this goes back to two things I've talked about briefly before. The fact that these high value stamps, and here you have 2 5-shilling stamps on an envelope from Dominica in 1913, yeah, and got to England, to London in January 1914, sent in, was it December 29th? So it illustrates two things. Again, you never see these high 5-shilling stamps used like that on a letter. Sure, it's overfranked, but it's great to see them. They're beautiful stamps. And they show the fact that collectors wanted these and sent them to themselves to have a piece of a letter that had both of the stamps on them. But it also shows the fact that in about 1903, the Dominica and the other colonies started issuing their own stamps again. And there's an example of the Edward VII issue of the high value, the 5-shilling, the very elaborate, beautiful design of the Dominica stamp. And then you go back and you see the Leeward Islands key plate that was used simultaneously with the Dominica issue. So you see a mixed franking of the 2 types of stamps that were available with the high 5-shilling value. So that's a neat cover. I love that cover, even though it's very philatelic. It has a place in my exhibit. Okay, next. Okay, here's another piece of postal history. By the 1930s, around in there, in the mid of the 1900s, the island developed its own village mail system. And there's a little outline of the island of Dominica, and that shows you in the little red star there where the La Plaine post office was. And this collector wrote in to the post office, to the La Plaine postmaster, and said, I would like to have a letter sent back to me in Scotland. And I know that there's a postal route that's been developed along, and you can see through the bottom there, it goes around the island. And I'd like to, would you ask the postmasters of the various villages that it goes through on the way? Rousseau was the capital where the GPO was. So it went through La Plaine and Delice and somewhere else, and I can't remember. Oh, Grand Bay. And went through 3 post offices, and it also got to Rousseau, and it has a Rousseau back stamp on it. So if you flip the letter over, you see the other 3 back stamps on from the other 3 post offices. So this is just a neat thing, but it illustrates that there was a mail system. All of the village post offices were all around the periphery of the island. And in fact, before the roads were built, the mail was delivered by mail ships. They went around and they stopped in each village. There was a harbor there, and they did various things, from the ocean, from the sea. And so there was water transport between Rousseau and the other villages, and until they built the roads. And even after they built the roads, the water transport was probably faster in some cases. But so it shows a little bit of the culture of how the mail was delivered. And that altogether there was about 15 different post offices around the island by about the mid 1900s. No, about the 1920s. And in fact, one part of my exhibit shows that whole village post office, how they developed, and examples from each one of them. Okay, go on to the next one. So the modern age strikes Dominica, the airmail. So a couple of examples of early airmails, and one is an airmail flight from the island of Montserrat to Dominica, and those flights actually went to several of the other British West Indies islands. But it was in 1931, and there was an experimental flight that went from Montserrat. It was it's not really a formal airfield there, but it went from Montserrat and eventually got to Dominica. And whether it actually landed in Dominica, but it got there, okay. And then on the right was a very early flight that actually did fly from Dominica. And it wasn't clear to me whether it was a little landing strip or whether it was a seaplane that went from Dominica to Dutch Guiana. And there was only about 8 letters, 8 letters carried on the flight to Dutch Guiana. But they were getting airmail systems in place, although Dominica for years the airmail letters actually were shipped over to the island of Antigua, and Antigua was the capital of the Leeward Islands, and there was developed a real airport there. So a lot of the Leeward Islands mail was transcribed and transshipped over to Antigua, and then went on to direct airmail to either the United States, various places, Miami or New York, and eventually, usually from New York over to England, to London. Okay, how are we doing? All right, here's a couple of covers. These are things that they look at it and they're sort of, you say, all right, kind of George VI period, 1938, October. Yeah, 2.5 penny rate, standard UPU rate from Dominica to wherever. And you look at it a little more closely, and then you look at the back, and that cover was from Viejas, which is one of the little villages on the coast of Dominica. And it always went back to Rousseau. And then it went to French Guiana, and you say, oh, that's pretty unusual destination. And this is commercial mail. It was not a stamp. Then you look at the other back stamps, and I'm not showing it to you, but in the exhibit page, it's a little better described. It went first from Dominica to Georgetown, British Guiana. And then you look at the next back stamp. It went from Georgetown, British Guiana to Paramaribo, Dutch Guiana. And then you look at the next back stamp. It went from Paramaribo, Dutch Guiana to Cayenne, French Guiana. And then it went to the village Saint-Laurent de Maroni in French Guiana, the village that was outside. So actually fascinating. It went through all of the Guianas to get to French Guiana. So it's a very interesting, and you have to wonder how they handled that. It was just, to go into the roots there. It's very interesting. The letter on the right just shows a mentioned example of airmail. The letters were sent first from Dominica from Rousseau. This was from Rousseau to Antigua, and they put the airmail sticker on, and they immediately went on to a boat that went over to Antigua, where it went off to from the airport there to beyond. Okay, next. I think we're still okay. This is a really interesting. This is very. You got to look at this for a minute, and you'll see why it's more than just what it appears to be. This letter was from Dominica, 1930, I guess. On my notes. April 19th, went to Trinidad. What happened was the mailbag, when it got to the Trinidad docks, got dumped in the salt water there, and all the letters got soaked. Okay. So the Trinidad post office took out the letters and stamped them damaged by seawater. And apparently this was a hand stamp that they had. And this is, nobody is, the hand stamp has been discussed, but nobody had ever seen an example of it. And I found this letter that had the damage by seawater example. And so that's interesting. And then you look on the back, and the thing on the right, the smaller inset, there is actually the back of this letter. And you see what looks like a stamp. Yeah, but it's not a stamp. It's actually an imprint, a reverse imprint of the stamp that got detached or floated off and then got pressed on the back of the envelope. The front of it got pressed on the back of the envelope. So it left a reverse print of the stamp on the stamp itself on the envelope. So it's a fascinating accident, sort of damaged by sea mail, sort of, it's not a crash cover or anything. It's a dumped in the seawater cover. It's a neat thing. Okay, next. Okay, you look at this, and any of you that collect sort of British colonies or know something about, a lot of you probably hopefully do, your British Empire study group, you know the name Roger Wells. And Roger Wells was a prolific collector of postmarks and cancellations of British places and a lot of other countries all over the world. So he would send himself covers to himself and two friends. And I'm almost certain that the bottom, Mr. Blanks there from Columbia, Louisiana, was probably one of his correspondents. And so he would send these letters pre-stamped to these small post offices in all over the world to get the postmarks, clear postmarks, and usually registered them so he would, they could keep track of them. But what happened to these? And they look pretty ordinary, except the story behind it. The Leeward Islands left the Dominica left the Leeward Islands colony as of December 31st, 1939. In other words, it was no longer part of the Leeward Islands colony. It became part of the Windward Islands group, but it got its own governor, and there's a lot of other stuff I'm not going to go into, but basically it was no longer part of the Leeward Islands. Well, what Mr. Wells or whoever did was he sent these covers in to be canceled by the two villages. Sophia was one, and the other one that was not actually addressed to him was Castle Bruce. Great name, Castle Bruce. You have visions of a big castle on a hill on the coast of Dominica. And he sent them off, and you can see they're canceled January, and both in January of 1940. Well, the Leeward Islands went out of, Dominica left the Leeward Islands on 31st of December, 39, so couple of weeks before. So these letters got to the Rousseau post office from the village, and the postmaster looked at it and he said, these aren't valid anymore. They're Leeward Island stamps. We're not part of the Leeward Islands. We're Dominica. They got to have Dominica stamps. So it's 2 weeks, okay. So he impounded the letters, and for 4 months they sat in the post office, not moving because they didn't have valid postage on them. So I don't know the story, but I gather there was probably a real, furious letters back and forth, and call the governor or write the, da 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 da. And so finally they were released, and you can see by the back stamps on that one. It went through Rousseau, the bottom letter here, on the 12th of January, and it's then and then Boston. The next back stamp is May. So from January to May, it was stuck in, at least for many weeks in the Rousseau post office, and it finally got to Boston and then to Columbia, Louisiana. So these are the illegal stamps being used on these letters. So it's a great little story. Next. Here's another one that's more to the eye than you can imagine. It all has to do with Leeward Islands and Dominica. There was a local rate for newspapers in Dominica that had been in use for a number of years, probably at least maybe, I think 15 or 20 years, that they could send newspapers at, such and such inside the island to, probably from the capital to one of the villages or something. And what happened was that the farthing stamp that was used to pay the postage was a Leeward Islands farthing stamp. Okay, there was no Dominica farthing stamp that was printed Dominica. The lowest value that Dominica issues had, they were both in the post office, but there was no farthing stamp that had Dominica on it. It just had Leeward Islands. So there was a problem, and I envisioned probably what happened was that the subscribers to the newspaper probably initially had to pay a halfpenny instead of a farthing for their newspaper for postage, and they probably screamed. They said, "Oh, double the postage! Come on, farthing stamp, and you're charging half a penny. What's going on here?" Well, I mean, I'm filling in the blanks here, but probably what happened was that somebody said, okay, that's not fair. They're having to pay a whole halfpenny instead of a farthing for this newspaper to be delivered. So what the postmaster did was he just said, okay, bisect the halfpenny stamps that were available and use those. And what he did was or at least he did for some of them, he used the old crown circle. Can you see it there? You can see it. There's a crown there that was probably in the drawer somewhere. And he slapped that onto the halfpenny, cut halfpenny, to indicate that this was legitimate. You know, this was okay to use this cut stamp to pay the rate for a farthing. And the sender only had to pay a farthing instead of a halfpenny for it. So finally in April, so that, as I told you, it went out of the farthing stamps, the Leeward Island stamps stopped on the 31st of December. This was sent in February. And in April 1st or early April, they finally issued a farthing stamp that said Dominica on it. It was a Dominica issued farthing stamp, so they didn't have to use the bisected stamps. These are actually very rare. Apparently, I've only heard of a couple of examples of these that still exist. And I don't know whether this was contrived or not, but this is not a newspaper wrapper. This is an actual envelope. So I think somebody sent it from Rousseau to Vieille-Casse to the village there. So we'll see. Anyway, it's a wonderful example of just in the right time period to show, the lack of farthing stamps. Next. Okay, I think we're getting close to the end here. Just wanted to show you that in World War II, there's a very interesting censorship story about Dominica, and they have lots of censor markings and lots of censor labels and all that stuff. And there's that's a beginning of the first page of that section, the ninth section. So what they first did to show censorship before they had their own censor labels and so on and so forth is they used an old canceller date stamp that dated back maybe 40 or 50 years. There was a general post office, and you can see on the right-hand letter there, just to New York, you can see the canceller there, and it has a date on it, but it also has the initial of the censor. So that they use that for the first censor marks. They use that to censor the mail. So if you look at the left-hand cover, on the back, and you can't see it because it's hidden by my picture and Joan and Robert there, but underneath our picture is the example of that right-hand circular cancel there with the censor initial on the back of this letter. It's right on the tape on the back. So that showed that's how they initially censored the mail, was with that thing where somebody initialed it. What's also interesting about the cover is that's the very first letter that was recorded and been reported that was censored in Dominica, that particular letter. And I don't know how that was determined, except I do know that they started, it's recorded that they started the censorship in 1939. And they started using printed labels, censorship labels that I'm sure you've all seen in 1941. But and this was 11th of October, and this is the first one. It doesn't mean that tomorrow somebody will find a letter that was censored on the 8th of October, 1939. But at this point, it is the first recorded censor letter from Dominica. And I believe that is the last example I was going to show you. So yeah, Joan, is there one more? I don't think so. Oh, yes. This is, okay, here's a postcard, shows the village of St. Joseph this is the last one, so you're relieved and be relieved in a minute. Postcard shows the village of St. Joseph on Dominica. On the back side with the address is addressed to, it's a commercial, real postcard, right rate, penny and a half to British Guiana, South America, Roseau cancel, and really nice little postcard. And then you look closely, or maybe not so closely, you've noticed it already. There's an octagonal passed by RR. That is a Dominica imperial censor mark that was done not by the local censors, but by the British. Were working for the British government. Not military, but the British government, to make sure mail was censored, and they were sent to the various islands to do the censorship, or they were hired as specific people on the island to do imperial censorship, not just local censorship. And that is the Dominica imperial censor mark, which is very rare, and there's only 2 examples of it known. And here it was on this postcard, just turned up, and I found it. And there's a couple of examples of this postcard. So I think there's probably more than 2 of them known, but they all, the 2 or 3 examples known all have that censor mark. But that censor mark imperial census mark hasn't showed up anywhere. Okay, so that's it. And so that's, as I said, that's vignettes of examples of the exhibit. There's a lot more stuff if you ever have a chance to see it. If you look at all of these examples I give it in the whole context of the whole exhibit, it all does tie together. It makes sense. But I just picked out things that I thought were kind of neat to show you that what might be of interest to a lot of people that are interested in stamps and covers.
Peter, that was fantastic. I mean, I could just blown away with some of those examples. And we have some questions in the question and answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this. And as we go through the questions and answers, we'll start bringing you over so you could ask your questions directly. So the first question we have is from Edward Smith. And I apologize, I have a puppy in the background.
That's Augusta.
And he wants to know, what was the significance of the 300 miles? You know, why was that so specific?
I can give you a very astute and precise answer. I haven't the slightest idea. I don't know.
Okay, moving on.
That's funny. I'm bringing over Larry. I hope he turns on his camera. Does that?
Oh, look, shame on me doing this.
I know I have to bring over the collector's cohort in crime. So what did you think? You do British too, Larry.
I'm sorry?
You're a British guy also. You do.
The home country.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's correct. I mean, look, I had a little bit of an introduction to this from Peter
Oh, sure.
about a year ago.
Was it that long ago, really? It's in the height of the COVID crisis.
Or the depth, depending upon.
Yeah, the height. Yeah.
So I think we touched on a couple of the pieces that you showed this evening, and it's just, I'm awestruck. I mean, it's just so comprehensive, and
Well, thank you.
what I really like is the bisect. I just love
Isn't that
bisect.
cute? I love it.
Especially legit, and I love the idea of the guy reaching into the drawer, taking out the old one, and just smacking it.
This makes it official. Bam.
Yeah, as though the other one wouldn't make it official, but love bisects.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. Patrick Reed asked, I note that the letter with the 2 5-shilling stamps also bears a farthing stamp. How common is a single, without other stamps on cover? And if Patrick's around, let me just see if I can find it.
Oh, you mean a farthing rate? Oh man, those farthing rates were usually only local rates, and in many cases printed matter rates. So they're very, if you find them on wrappers or something, they're very actually used intact like that. Very, very uncommon. Very uncommon.
Wow. So, and I put Patrick in there. Dominica as an island, it's pretty rustic, I guess. Is it still?
Yeah, there's not much in the middle except mountains and things, and you trying to cross the island. I think there's only one road that goes across the island in the middle somewhere. It's pretty. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I have unfortunately never been there, but it's yes. Okay.
Now, that was my other question. If you've ever had the opportunity to travel there. So a lot of philatelic covers too, Edward Smith noticed.
Yeah, but I want to explain. I know they're philatelic, but I consider them to be part of the history of the post office and why people wanted the stamps and how they used them and what they used them for. So it's supposed to, they're acknowledged in the exhibit and written up as being contrived or philatelic, but they are there as part of the history of the post office. Okay, I'm not trying to, fool anybody. I know what they are, but that's still the use of some of those stamps. So you don't see them any other way used, and so they have a place to be displayed and shown and explained how they were used. So
David, this is Dan Walker. I have a question.
Hi, Dan. I haven't seen you in days. Dan is a neighbor of mine. He lives 5 houses down from me in Florida, so we see each other fairly often.
You showed the Leeward Island cover with all the Leeward Island stamps, and there was a paste on. It said Postmaster Dominica or something like that. Is that a common thing from Dominica?
Dan, repeat what you said. That you said that the postmaster was a paste on.
You showed the full set of Leeward Island.
Yeah.
And at the lower left-hand corner, there was a paste on. The paste on said Postmaster Dominica. And my question is, was that a common thing to find on covers?
Well, Dan, I have to go back and look at it. I just thought it was an official envelope that the postmaster sent the mail on. It is a paste on?
It looked like a paste on to me.
I'll have to look at it, but my assumption was that was a postmaster, official letter, official envelope, I should say, that was used that they sent stamps to collectors and they mailed it to them. And I think what I think the envelope was, the guy, man or woman that ordered it said, please just put the whole set on, on the outside. But I can't answer your question because I'll have to go look at the envelope.
Check it out.
I'll get back to you on it. I know where you live.
Yep.
Hi, this is Ed Smith. My question on the philatelic is, how are they contrived? I mean, the only stamps I can think of that I would be surprised to be purchased deliberately as to collect would be, for instance, the stock deed transfers or such. If the post office sells a lot of stamps to people who just want to have the stamp, the stamp canceled on an envelope in their collection, it's still a sale.
So, but what's
How is that contrived? I mean, you're selling stamps, right?
Yeah.
And you sell it to somebody who just wants a canceled or mint stamp on their envelope.
Yeah.
You still sold the stamp.
Yeah, sure.
So how is that? I'm not sure that's a contrived thing. You sold the stamp.
Oh, when I say contrived, what I mean is it's a philatelically, it's contrived for a philatelic reason. It's not commercial mail. That's what I mean. I bought the covers. I love them. They're in my exhibit. I'm not unhappy with them at all. By contrived, I simply meant that somebody deliberately decided to add all these stamps and use them as a means to get them canceled. That's not necessarily a negative for me. That I'm glad they exist and they're fun to look at, and they're valuable actually.
If I was going to go further, I'd say the entire issuance of the United Nations is contrived stamps, because how many people really use United Nations stamps to send their mail?
Good point. Yeah.
I think that was a game. But come on, more questions for Peter. We get to see Peter.
Ed Grabowski here. I have a couple of comments, questions. The first one, Peter, is on the compass question, not the compass question, the 300-mile question. Take a compass and draw a circle, a 300-mile circle around Dominica, and see what's in it.
Yeah, it's other islands.
Yeah, and that's it. So that's I mean, I just recognize that Guadeloupe and Martinique surround Dominica.
Right. Oh yes.
So I hadn't realized that before. The other thing, I was pleased to see your conundrum of wanting to show postal history without having to adhere to the traditional view of postal history. I faced the same problem in my Guadeloupe postal history, in quotes, exhibit from the early 2000s. I called it Guadeloupe history, and the judges ran hot and cold on it. I was told outright by my good friend Dave Herndon that he would never award it anything more than a gold because I wasn't showing postal history. I was showing usage of the stamps and development of the post offices.
I know where he was coming from, and I think we've evolved away from that. And as you know, I'm a fairly active judge myself. And in my Montserrat exhibit, I went from talking about routes, routes, and markings treatment, in other words, organization, to talking about the history of the post office. And
Right.
nobody can quarrel that that's not a philatelic topic. And if you go and look at my exhibit and you look at all the pages, you'll notice in every case I always mention the route, the route, and the rate. It's there. It's always there. It's in, and it's that information is on every single item that I show. It's just how I treat the material and how I organize it. And I organize it in a semi-chronological way that relates to how the postal system in that island developed and was used. And it went from, random ships landing there to having censored mail that went by airplanes.
Well, your layout of your exhibit almost looked like mine. I love to see that. And of course, I did run into a pack of judges who disagreed with the postal history usage view, and I got the Grand Prix in 2006. So
they you beat them, and I
don't know.
I think we as judges have evolved quite a lot, and we give the exhibitors the benefit of the doubt. And, Ed, the one thing I always say to exhibitors, and I say to my other fellow judges, for God's sakes, we're there to judge the material that these exhibitors want to show. That's what they want to show. So it's our job to do the best job we can to help them do what they want to do. And if we have to change the way we evaluate things or expand our boundaries, then we got to do that. And I think we as judges as a whole have been pretty good about evolving.
Finally, Joan, can I share the screen? I'd like to show Peter my Dominica cover.
Go right ahead, Ed. It's special. And for those of you who are interested in seeing Peter's full collection, I think it's still online with the Sarasota Club, right?
Joan, I checked that the other day. They brutally took it down.
Oh, no.
Oh, look at that. Look at that.
This is my philately and international mail order fraud collection.
Yes, I've seen some of that.
This is
that's wonderful.
Professor A. Victor Segno in the American Institute of Mentalism in California from Dominica. I have about 800 fraud covers now in 4 fraudsters, and this is the only Dominica cover. But I did get one, so
yeah. And it's registered. It's the right rate. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And we have a couple of people. I think, Evan, you have been waiting patiently.
Well, hello, Peter.
Hi, man. How are you?
I'm doing very well. We have hot but decent weather up here in Ohio. I was asking, I know all we have seen here is a snippet of your top quality exhibit, but one thing I did notice was a lack of military covers, military mail of any sort. Was there much out of Dominica?
I'm just thinking a minute. It's interesting you say that. I had a Montserrat exhibit that I no longer show, and I had several military mail pieces in that, and I don't have any in the Dominica. I haven't come across any. So that's a very interesting question. I'll have to go back and just read about what sort of military presence there was during the war. And I have a lot of censored covers. And there's a whole almost a frame of censored cover material in the exhibit itself, but it's not military. So that's a very good question. I will thank you for bringing that to my attention.
I seem to recall an earlier webinar about the clipper planes with the mail coming in from Asia through Africa and then up the coast and along and the seaplanes coming up, and Dominica being one of the islands that the mail would stop.
Dominica.
Yeah, Dominica. So maybe there was military presence, but not really a great military presence.
I don't know. The fact that Van brought that up, it just, there's Simon. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Peter.
Sorry.
Well, there's some
Hi,
very
excuse
early
me.
soldiers' letters. I think I've got one from 1801. But
You have what? I didn't hear.
I've got one from 1801, a Napoleonic era one. But there were no.
What is it? I didn't hear what it was, what you were saying.
A soldier's letter at a penny rate.
Oh, soldier's letter. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Very
So
good.
there are one or two, and a couple of officers' letters, I think, 19th century. But Second World War, no.
No.
We didn't. A lot of the islands we gave American bases to,
Yeah.
but Dominica wasn't one. So not like St. Lucia or some of the other islands.
Joan, I'd like to introduce Simon Richards, who is the world expert on Dominica philately. And when I started, and I only do the postal history, and Simon does everything. And he is absolutely the king of Dominica, as far as I'm concerned. And the first time I was showing Simon some of my material, I grabbed him at a Stampex a couple of years ago, 3 years ago or something, and forced the poor guy for about 3.5 to 4 hours to look at every single cover I owned. I had photo scans of them, and he was very patient. He only got up once to get a glass of water, and we went through all of those covers. And I'm forever grateful for his help, and I really respect him for his knowledge and what he's helped me with. So I just wanted to give a commercial there.
Well, thank you, Simon. Thank you for joining us. Evan, are you done with your question?
Yes.
Oh, terrific. Okay, Frederick, you have your hand up there.
Hey, Peter, Frederick Lawrence.
Hi, Frederick. Are you in Arizona?
Yes, I am, and it's a balmy 110 degrees Fahrenheit.
It's
here
dry
today.
heat, though, right?
Yes, remember it is a dry heat.
Yeah, I grew up there, remember? So.
Yes, I know that. But I'm not leaving because I shoveled too much snow in earlier years.
I'm in Maine right now, because in Florida, it's not a dry heat, so I'm up in Maine.
Peter, I'd like to ask you about that Crown paid hand stamp or cancel. When a device like that is used with multiple ink pads, say red and black, when the same device is used with multiple pads, then you end up sometimes with transition impressions. So
Right.
Black tinged in red, red tinged in black.
Right.
Are any of the impressions that you have seen of that Crown paid
Crown circle, yeah.
impressions?
No, they're all either red and there's one black, and the reds all look the same and they're all the same shade, and they're very clearly it was a red. Yeah, so that's a good. I understand your question, but there's just one black and that's it.
Wow. So the device would have to have been pretty clean to super clean at the time, or we would expect to have seen some red in with that black impression.
Yeah, and I'd have to go back and look at the date again of that. I don't remember, but I think it was right in the middle of when the device was being used, and there's doesn't seem to be any trace of any sort of transitional. Yeah, it's a very good question, Frederick.
It's something to look at again.
All right, and I have several examples of the red used in the later period when there was a lot of them sent to Scotland, and I'll look at.
Good.
You have your homework assignment.
All right.
Paul, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. It was a great display. Just a quick comment that I've got one of the RR code imperial censorship marks, but on a cover.
Oh, good.
So if you can let me have your email address, or perhaps Joan can, I'll send you a scan.
Yeah, we'll do this. We won't publish an email. That's a little bit weird, but we'll make sure you get it, Peter.
Paul.
Super.
Paul, I'll get it to you. If you're a member of the APS, I don't know if you are.
I'm in the UK at the moment, so
okay.
No, I'm not an APS member. But
yeah, I'm just going to say my email address is published
everywhere.
Everywhere.
I'll find it then.
I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, Paul, just send me a note and then I'll hook it up. I just feel a little bit strange putting someone's email address in the chat.
Yep.
Peter, I wanted to ask you a question about the obliterator numbers used for the different British post offices in countries in South
Yes.
America and the Caribbean. Did they use the British stamps up until the time the country joined the UPU?
No, they only used, most of the colonies used the British stamps for a very short period of time, usually somewhere between 1857 to maximum 1860, 1861, very short period of time.
Okay.
I think it was just too much of a hassle to send them all these stamps out to all of these colonies, well, certainly the ones in the West Indies. So it was only used for a short period of time. And
Within the British colonies.
British
Within-
colonies. Yeah,
Oh,
and the other thing was the colonies didn't particularly like using them, if you could think about it. For obvious reasons.
Well, I collect, I was born in the DR and grew up in Haiti, and I collect the British stamps used, I think, from 1865 to 1881 in Haiti.
Oh,
They had a
okay.
post office in Haiti, which was
Yes.
not British colony, but they stopped using them when they joined the UPU, because then those post offices in foreign countries were shut down as soon as they started issuing their own stamps.
That's a very important point, but the point was these were British post offices abroad. And
Yeah.
these places like Dominica or Montserrat did not consider that they were not British post offices. They were colonial post offices that had their own identity. And so that's one reason they didn't particularly like using the British stamps.
That is so cool. Well, my sister and I went to Dominica in 2019 and thoroughly
really?
enjoyed our visit.
Yeah.
And I did go to the post office in Roseau, but and sent myself a postcard. But I found that now I'm having to collect all these Great Britain stamps with the different obliterator numbers on it for all these different countries, because I went to visit so many of the islands in the Caribbean. And my father managed sugarcane factories in the DR and in Haiti. And my first stamp collections were stamps from and covers from all the different islands and countries that were sugar producers or exporters.
Oh, that's
And so now I'm kind of had decided I've had this other obsession. So now I've got to collect all these stamps, Great Britain stamps used in all these different countries, which really didn't become known to me until the 1840, 1940 specialized catalogs. In the index, they
Yeah.
started showing.
They're showing the lists of all of identifying the numbers with,
Yeah. And I realized in my Great Britain collection, I had one of those in my Great Britain collection that was really an Argentina stamp. Had that number. I hadn't realized what those numbers meant. Just thought there were different post offices in Great Britain. But now it's quite an interesting world.
that's great. That's terrific.
Thank you, everyone. Peter, you've been, no. Peter from England.
Hello. Good morning from near
Hi,
London.
Peter. Yes.
Peter, nice to see your face and to listen to a fascinating talk and some great stuff. What struck me, and since I dreamt up the question, it's become more interesting. 2 or 3 of your early covers are addressed to generals. And I wondered whether they were military generals. And if they were, there's some of your military mail for you.
Good point. I'll have to look at it, and actually maybe, I don't know if Simon can actually comment on that himself. Do you, Simon?
I think it's because, though, earlier ones of the family had been out there, and they effectively got lands. So most of that correspondence, although it's going back to generals, it's their factors of their estates rather than the mail being military itself.
Okay.
I see. Yeah. But it's interesting that they were actually addressed to generals, presumably British Army generals stationed in London or thereabouts.
They had been in the Caribbean earlier, or Melville had earlier in his career. But,
Okay.
yeah. They ended up being poets, though. The last members of the family were poets when the line died out.
Yeah, several of them were to houses or I'll call them the clubs, really, in London, where they probably had their winter homes, and those were almost certainly the factors mailing in for it. But there was one, a General M, and I forget the rest of the name. It was about the last one you showed, and that name rang a bell with me, in that I think he was he was a general during the Napoleonic Wars, I think. So it wouldn't be true military mail, but it went to someone who was a true general.
Well, Peter, I will go back and study some of those covers more carefully.
I wanted to bring to the woman who was talking about doing the British post offices in Haiti. I was listening to a podcast about Haiti after the revolution, and around the mid-century they kind of lost control of their own country. I'm just curious, what was the legal arrangements for the British setting up all these post offices in other countries that were not their colonies? Was it
I can tell you they set up the post offices for their own citizens or people who were doing business in those countries to have an efficient mail system to get the mail back to other places. And they, in many cases, didn't bother to ask anybody. They just did it. I mean, they were stronger and they had, they just did it.
Well, they did have diplomatic corps in these countries, in Haiti, and also the mail to Haiti came through from British packet ships and Netherlands packet ships, and different types of arrangements. But when supplies went to Haiti on a British ship, they would exchange mail to the British expatriates or the British who were occupying, living on the island. And also, then they had this complicated history. It's more complicated than I can explain because I'm just learning it myself. But that's what makes Haiti such an interesting country to understand, is that after the revolution in 1804, when they took over the island from the French, they actually, as most people know, that revolution and their ability to destroy quite a bit of the French troops, French ships that tried to come back and take over the island, that Napoleon sent over there to take back the island because they needed that revenue to support the war efforts, Napoleon war efforts, was why Napoleon had to sell Louisiana and the Louisiana territories. And because he ran out of money and they had damaged so much of his ships. And so the Haiti history is quite extraordinary, and I would think everybody would want to collect that country. But I'm a lifetime member of the Haiti Philatelic Society, so it goes that way.
Sounds like another topic. Keith, you had a question. I know you've been.
Hi, glad to jump in. Hi, Peter. It's Keith.
Hi.
When you were mentioning the fact that there were, I think it was 3 GBUs in Dominica at that time. And
There's probably more, but I mean, they're very scarce. Yeah.
Well, no kidding. So I went to the Bible.
No, you have to read it.
Glasgow collection. great collection. So I went in there and I go, okay, I'm going to get Peter on this thing. I look in there, Glasgow had none. He had 3 crown circles, of which he did not differentiate between blacks and reds. And I go,
there's only one black.
my goodness, well, that was typical of Robbie, but my goodness, they're incredibly scarce not to be in either his sale, and I didn't get a chance to check another great sale. So my salutations to you on those that used a broad cover you've got.
Oh, well, thank you, but
Hey, Byron, oh, sorry, Byron, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Hi, all of you. I'm Byron Mitchell. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I enjoyed very much your exhibit. But I've been collecting Puerto Rico postal history for many years now under the Spanish dominion, and what really gets me is that there are very few covers from Puerto Rico to the small islands, or from the small islands to Puerto Rico. We can find covers from Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic, and we can find covers to Cuba, and maybe 1 or 2 covers from to Jamaica. But to the small islands, with the exception of St. Thomas, which was where all of this mail got together, you don't find any covers at all. You don't find any covers to Dominica. Or I only have 1 cover, which is a postal card from Puerto Rico to Guadalupe. And the thing is that gets me is that in the 1870s, there was one town in Puerto Rico on the southern coast which had 3,000 British subjects living there. Now, those people must have written to their homes or someplace, but there's no mail to any place. You don't find any mail. We had 6 British post offices in Puerto Rico, and most of the letters just went to Spain or to England. That's about it. No mail to the small islands. I know that the Spanish and the French and the British were always fighting, and maybe this was the reason there was no mail, but I don't know. If that was not the reason, there must be some other reason.
well, I kind of, my personal opinion on that is I think it has to do with the mail. A lot of times mail reflected the commercial ties and social ties between between correspondents, and these islands,
Yes.
they communicated much more with the French islands, partly because if you look at the geography, they're like Dominica, surrounded very close to both, not very far from both Martinique and Guadeloupe.
Yes.
But I've collected a lot of the British West Indies in terms of postal history over the years, or about 5 of them. The only mails that I've seen in any of those islands that I collected that was from Spanish speaking places was to and from the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
But never from Puerto Rico or from Cuba.
But the thing is that in the southern coast, in this town which I mentioned, the 3,000 British subjects that lived there, they left after the Spanish placed some laws and things. But the commercial between Puerto Rico and all those small islands went mostly from a port there, which is called Naguabo, and they used to ship hundreds of pounds of meat from there to the small islands. But no correspondence, no nothing.
Well, your question has prompted me. I'm going to talk to, as a friend of mine, Yamil Corey, who.
Oh yeah, I know Yamil.
I have to ask him because he's one of the world specialists on some of the Spanish mails of the Caribbean, and ask him what he ask him that point. I think it's very interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Andres, I see your hand open. You're welcome to unmute and.
Hello, Peter. Good evening.
Oh, Andreas, how are you? You're looking a little stiff. Are you feeling okay?
I'm feeling perfectly. You
I'm
don't see
kidding.
me.
That's your
Oh.
picture. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. That was my humor.
My picture, not my, it should be my video, but it doesn't matter. I want to commend you for the wonderful presentation. Very nice doing this, the work of the postal system, of the post office. That's a very nice way of showing postal history. And on the other side, I would like to know, did you ever see any letters coming from Dominica to Argentina or to Uruguay?
No. I have seen letters from some of the other countries I've collected, from Turks and Caicos Islands and from Montserrat to Uruguay, yes, but never to Argentina.
Okay, because I have one. I have one, not an early one, but a early Queen Elizabeth from Dominica to Argentina, and that is pretty unusual.
Oh, yeah. That's
It's
interesting.
very, there must have been very, very little correspondence between Dominica and the southern corner of South America.
Yeah.
You know, I collect Punta Arenas.
Yes.
So I look for every rare origin, and I did never see anything coming from Dominica nor from Montserrat or those small islands. Those are pretty rare.
Yeah.
Should be pretty rare.
They are. Everything is
Okay,
rare from those islands.
Congratulations, Peter. Very nice, and it would be very nice meeting you again.
Oh, yes, Andreas. I hope I see you in the next few months. It'd be great.
Okay.
They're having the Sarasota Stamp Show this year, aren't they, in person?
Yes, yes.
So,
That's why they took down my exhibit from the virtual, because they're already talking about next year.
wow. I'm floored. Any other questions for Peter?
More of an observation. When my brother was in the fire department, he started out at an active house, and then they moved into some teaching, and then because he didn't join the fire department to stay safe, so he wanted to move to he got himself transferred out of that quiet house. Was Dominica like within the islands what you might call with the fire department a quiet house, a place where you could there wasn't a lot of traffic in or out, or it was important, but not that important?
Relatively speaking to some of the other islands that I've been interested in, Dominica was a little larger. And in terms of, from my point of view, finding mail, it's pretty difficult to find, but it's a little easier. It took me, I'll give you an example. It took me about 20 years to put together a Montserrat exhibit. And I did it in a flash of time for Dominica. It only took me 10 years. So, I mean, so there's a little bit more mail. Dominica was a little bit more, there was a little bit more going on there. So there was a little bit more commercial mail coming in and out of that. So that was a good thing. But but still, relatively speaking, the mail from all of these small islands, it just doesn't exist. The commercial mail, the good stuff, it's just not there. So it's not a matter of how expensive or not expensive it is. It doesn't matter how expensive it is. Well, it doesn't matter somewhat how expensive it is. But if it doesn't exist, you can't find it.
I would say another thing that happens in these islands is what happens in Haiti, is that people find other ways, like my father would send personal mail to reach my grandmother or my relatives in Louisiana through people who were going back home.
Absolutely.
Or going back to the States, because the mail was not consistent. You couldn't send a letter through the Haitian post office and you didn't know when it'd ever get there, So
well, I would say most of the British mail systems that these colonies had, they were pretty good. I mean, the mail eventually got there. but I know in some countries even today, you know, mail a letter and you know,
Yes.
people don't use the mail system. You know.
But the other thing about collecting the Leeward Islands, Dominica and all those, is that it's difficult because sometimes the stamps are not for Dominica or the Leeward Islands, or like you said, the capital of the islands, the Leeward Islands, was Antigua. So
Yeah.
maybe they had other mail denotions on them. Denotation.
Well, the Leeward Islands were not really, the mail systems of those Leeward Islands, individual Leeward Islands, were pretty separate. The Antigua was the capital, but there was very little central government in the Leeward Islands. It was, they were pretty independent, and they basically politically formed the Leeward Islands Federation, because the other islands were so small, it just, the British government didn't feel it made economic sense to send out a full formal governor to every island. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Hi, Nigel. How are you? Good. Good. How are you doing? Hey, as a Trinidad collector, you really made me proud to see that damage by seawater marking, postal marking. Never seen that one before. I didn't even know it existed. So thanks for that gem that you exhibited there. If you ever want to get rid of it, you know who your buyer is.
Well, did you notice the little postcard? That's to Trinidad too.
I did notice that one for the 300 miles distance. So I'm very impressed with your material, and presentation was awesome.
Well, I tried to make it interesting for everybody.
Peter, can I get through to you?
I'm here.
I'm Bill. Bill O'Connor.
I know Bill.
I know you. It's been a while. Just a quick observation. The best I saved sent some mail from World War II, and I have received a few covers via the Eastman Kodak Company, and I had some from Antigua, and I also have some from the Leeward Islands, not from Dominica, however, and that's why I was hoping you would just send me one to add to my collection. But anyway, that might be one source, and I must have 50 or 60.
So you don't have a Dominica censored cover?
No, I don't.
Oh, I have a couple of extra ones. Yeah, I'll send you one. I mean,
I will work something out. And then the other thing is, I thought I had nothing from Dominica. And I was thinking, I've been collecting for many years, I should have something. And I have two unused postcards. One actually is a reply card. It's a 1.5 penny card. Unfortunately, nothing's on it, which is typical of some of these things that were partly made for collectors. And I wonder if people use these sorts of reply cards, because I love to get the reply on these reply cards. And
yes,
I do. If you have that in your collection.
In my exhibit, I do not have one of the reply card. No, I don't.
Anyway, well, maybe I can send this to you in response to your wonderful gift. So.
I don't collect mint stuff, just used.
Oh,
so thank
God.
you. Yeah.
Oh, God,
I just do postal use.
Okay, so okay. Yeah. Anyway, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I was glad I stayed to the bitter end to see your send some mail. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Any other questions, comments?
Peter, have you looked at that cover that went through the 3 Guianas as to the address? It's Saint Laurent, I think you find. It's worth looking. It's worth researching the address a bit. I think you find it's a penal colony.
Penal colony, really?
Yeah, I've got a couple addressed down there quite clearly to somebody from Dominica who was incarcerated there. I'm not sure if your one's the same, but we should compare some notes about the correspondence.
Simon, when I have it, well, I'm in Maine. I don't know if you know U.S. geography, but I'm about as far from Florida as I can be and still be on the East Coast of the United States. But when I get home, I will scan that and send it to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
I'm going to see you anyway in September. So
yeah, no, I'm hoping the flights are opening by then. Yeah, we're counting on you.
Okay.
Oh. Okay. Oh, Derek. You have to unmute yourself, Derek. There we go.
That's it. Good evening, everyone. Peter, fantastic presentation. I am one of those collectors that are actually in the islands. I am a Jamaican and I am a Salvation Army officer. So I am actually living in St. Lucia. And
really?
Quite a number of expedition, well, not expedition, but we did a lot of relief work over in Dominica, me being the Salvation Army guy that was closest. Unfortunately, quite a bit of the postal history that was located in Dominica was lost during Hurricane Maria. However, there are some pieces that are available here in St. Lucia. I do have a very, very small collection or a couple of covers from Dominica, and I really value them so much. I heard one of our contributors mentioning that he's not finding or seeing a lot of covers and information going out to the Spanish-speaking countries. And I think one of the reasons for this is that predominantly Dominica, St. Lucia, and these islands, these side were mostly French-speaking or English-speaking. St. Lucia, for example, it exchanged hands 14 times, 7 times for the British, 7 times for the French. Very rich history. Currently, most of the people here in St. Lucia, almost all of them, the natives, they speak French, although English might be their first language and the accepted language. It's a very rich history. It's a very unique history. And again, I just want to, say thank you for sharing tonight. And I look forward for participating in more that are focusing on the British West Indies.
Oh, thank you, Derek. That's lovely to hear from you. And what a treat to hear from St. Lucia. That's great.
I think one of the fellows was thinking about starting up the British West Indies study group again. I know it went, who is it? Because they had the study group, then it went.
Oh, excuse me. It's alive and kicking. There's no, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wonder which study group it was in the group.
The British Caribbean Philatelic Study Group is an American-based group, which has never ceased being functional and has a journal, and it has its little bit ups and downs, but it's got several hundred members and it's fine.
Oh, wow.
And the British West Indies Study Circle is a powerhouse. Simon is a key member in that, and they publish wonderful journals and research articles, and they've got, what do you have, 400 or 500 members, isn't it?
It's probably a couple hundred more than the US group, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of...
I have an 11-year-old journal here of the British Caribbean Philatelic Journal.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's the same.
Yep, I'm a past president of that group.
Oh, that's
some years ago.
Wow. Well, I got misinformation. I am so sorry.
No.
I look to promote these things, especially to get people who collect the area so we could have great discussions.
No, the British Caribbean group is a APS member of the, one of the societies belonging to the APS.
Oh, terrific. Well, it's a great source. All right. Any other questions, comments?
We're talking about contact between the Spanish and the English and the French-speaking islands. Now, is this a question of, in the past, and has that changed in the present? Because, well, the world has changed a great deal since in the last 3 or 4 decades. And I'm just wondering.
Edward, I think, as Derek pointed out, it's the languages, and if you have a common language of either French or English, there will tend to be more commercial trade. People will trade with merchants and companies where there's a common language, and there was just the Spanish speaking. They intercommunicated between Cuba and Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and Central America, for example. And but the English speaking islands and the French speaking, Derek pointed out very rightly, a lot of the island or some of those islands are bilingual, that they were back and forth between England and France for 100 years, and the populations today still tend to speak both languages.
Because I was just thinking, here in New York, in the last 2 decades, I'm seeing banks that originated in Spain. They have branches in New York City, where it was, before that, it would have been American, maybe some British-based, early, British banks, but that's more European to America.
Yeah, but New York isn't a very good example. It's one of the major financial capitals of the world. So, they as is London, so that they, you get all sorts of lots of companies from other banks and companies from other parts of the world setting up branches in New York. It's whether they have a branch in St. Louis or,
Oh, okay. So it's a little bit like Italian banks because of our Italian American community. You go the cliche with The Godfather, but yeah, we have a lot of Italian banks, and we've also have a lot of Italian Americans.
All right. Rick, I always love your backgrounds. So it's nice seeing anyone. Peter, thank you very much.
Okay, I had a
chatting.
good time.
Yeah,
that was good.
I
I
have a
really
question.
appreciate.
Okay.
Hi, Peter. I really liked your presentation, and I'm very new in this hobby. So actually, I asked my question in the chat. So I wanted to know, like, how much time did it take to collect everything, whatever you have showed, and come up with this exhibit?
Yeah, I think actually I started collecting Dominica maybe 10, 15 years ago. I tell you very quickly, I've done major exhibits in 5 of the different West Indies islands, if you include the Turks and Caicos Islands, over a period of years. But this material, some of it, first of all, it's very hard to find. It's not even a matter of how expensive it is. It's very hard to find because they're small islands. There wasn't that much mail, so it's hard to find. And secondly, there's still a lot of them are expensive, and I would do a collection and exhibit and show it, and then basically sell it and recycle the proceeds into buying material for the new. So that went along. But to answer your specific question, Dominica, it's about 15 years that I bought material, and I actually put the exhibit together as a formal exhibit, structured it in 2020 when we were sort of marooned we live in Sarasota, Florida, my wife and I, and I spent a good part of that time actually writing up and mounting the exhibit that in 2020. It took me about 7 months.
Wow, great. Yeah. Thanks for the answer. Yeah.
Okay.
But Peter, you could do one frame, so you don't have to collect as much, right? People could start exhibiting. If you're interested in exhibiting, just doing.
No, I want to, Joan, I just want to be very clear. If you want to collect something like one of the British West Indies islands and do a broad spectrum approach from, over a period of years, it just takes a long time to get the material. It's not that it's even what the price is, it's just not available. So, but one frame exhibit, sure. But if you collect something, there's more material available, it's easier to get, and you can put it together faster. But I just have always had a fascination personally for the West Indies. And in fact, all of my life, I've only exhibited and collected small British colonial islands. And there is a reason for that I've written about, but I won't bore you with that now, but that's all I've ever done. So I've been known as the guy that collects those little islands, that they're fascinating.
Have you thought of going into collaboration with other collectors who've done other islands and to build?
Edward, what happens is in the groups like the British West Indies Study Circle and the British Caribbean Group, if the names indicate that the members collect all these different islands. So the journals are a mixture of material and articles from all the British Caribbean islands or all the British West Indies. So I know a lot about a lot of the islands, even though I don't specifically collect them. And also the postal systems and the types of the rates and the routes and things are common to a lot of the islands. They're the same. I mean, they had the same rates, and they, their postal systems were very similar. So I consider myself a West Indies specialist, as Simon Richards is exactly the same way, but he does pan-island exhibits. He puts sailing ships of the Caribbean together. He has a marvelous large gold medal, international large gold medal on putting together a lot of the different islands in terms of looking at the rates and the shipping between, using several of the different countries.
Okay.
Oh, well, thank you.
I have a question.
Rich?
Okay. Yeah, Peter, the islands, whether leeward or windward, that are no longer part of the Commonwealth, what responsibility or what action can the Crown take in the case of any of those former possessions?
It's a little complicated because a lot of them, even though they no longer recognize the Queen of England as their head of state. That's the basic thing, and they have their own president or a different form of government. But the commonality is that they tend to have the British legal system. They use the British legal system, and some of them, in fact, some of the islands use they still have recourse or access to the British court system, and so it's not an all or nothing. They're either a British, if the Queen of England is still on their stamps, let's put it that way, they still recognize the Queen as the head of state there. But a lot of the islands, many of them have changed and are now independent, and they call themselves, they are republics, and they have a president rather than the Queen. But even the ones that are recognize the Queen, as I recall, Grenada is still the island of Grenada. The Queen is still the head of state, but the island is completely independent. It's like Canada.
That's the one I wanted specifically to ask about. What happened during the Marxist action in '87 when the U.S. went in and was involved? Where were the Brits then in '87 in Grenada?
I think they stayed far out of it and tried to ignore the whole thing. But they had the island was independent, okay? They just simply recognized the Queen as head of state. The analogy would be a place like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They still recognize the Queen of England as their head of state, but there's no legal ties, I mean, the Prime Minister of UK can't tell the Prime Minister of Canada to do anything. Thanks. He can, but he won't necessarily.
Yeah, it won't get anywhere.
Okay. We're having a thunderstorm, so if you accidentally get disconnected, it wasn't intentional.
You're doing it on purpose. Click.
Oh, I hate that. When you're in a great conversation, then all of a sudden, like, meeting over. But anyway, it's very good. So, anything?
Okay.
Come on, we're gonna going once.
Okay.
We have to let Peter eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 8 o'clock here. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, and nice seeing a lot of my friends. I'm particularly delighted to see Simon.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing you in September, Peter.
All right, thanks, Simon. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks
Bye.
very much. That was very fun.
Thank you very much. Real
privilege to be with you.
Bye.
Peter, that was fantastic.
Bye, all.
Hey, John.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. I really appreciated it.
My mother doesn't let me sign off until everyone leaves, so. Hey, John. Okay, I am going to say goodnight. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.